Hello, fight fans, and welcome to another edition of Monday Night Fight Talk. As always, I am your host, Dylan Brewski, and we have an action-packed show for you today. We had Bellator 290, where we saw a legend, in the greatest sense of the word legend, have his retirement fight. We had UFC Fight Night, Lewis versus Spivac. We had some big announcements, such as Ultimate Fighter coming back. The coaches have been announced, and it is absolutely huge. Gonna get into that a little bit very quickly. And also, of course, we have to predict UFC 284 in Perth, Australia, headlined by the number one and number two pound for pound fighters in the world, in a champ versus champ matchup. Very excited to do that. But let's start off with Bellator 290. Just going to talk about the co-main and the main event here, where the co-main was middleweight champion Johnny Eblen taking on the prodigy of Mr. Fedor Emelianenko. Man, that's a hard name to say sometimes. But this is a weird way to say this. It was a fun, competitive fight, but it was also fairly one-sided. Johnny Eblen is going to be a humongous problem in this middleweight division. As long as he is in Bellator, he is going to be a serious, serious problem for this middleweight division. I mean, he has the wrestling background. We know what he can do in the wrestling department. But his striking just keeps getting better and better and better every single fight. It's absolutely amazing what this guy can do, especially against a very experienced opponent, and Anatoly Tokov. I mean, absolutely incredible. He dominated. For the most part, he dominated Tokov in this fight, getting his first title defense under his belt after beating another legend in Gegard Mousasi earlier in 2022 to get the belt. So, I mean, he took out two guys that have way more experience. I saw something that Tokov was in Bellator before Johnny Eblen had his first pro fight. That's how long Tokov has been in Bellator. And for that to be your first ever title defense on CBS in front of the whole world, very awesome to see that happen. And then, of course, we have our main event. Ryan Bader taking on the legend himself, Fedor. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not incredibly familiar with Fedor. I'm only 24 years old, so my coming into MMA, where I first started to truly love MMA, because I was a casual fan back in the Rampage days, the Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida type days, but I didn't start really getting into it until there was featherweights and bantamweights in the UFC. Pride was long gone, where obviously Fedor made it the career that he has. But that being said, I do understand the significance, the impact that Fedor had on the world of MMA. Everything he has done for this great sport. He's the GOAT heavyweight, and that's crazy to say. You usually don't say someone's the GOAT of a division when they never competed in the UFC. Fedor could have competed in the UFC, let's be honest. He didn't want to. And I think, truly without a doubt, the heavyweight GOAT is Fedor. But all that being said, we rarely see a storybook ending when it comes to MMA fighters. And this one was no different. Ryan Bader just completely dominated him. Fedor has never, they talked about it on the broadcast, Morrow and Big John McCarthy, that defense has never been Fedor's strength. He's always just been an offensive guy, and he's been able to win fights that he shouldn't have been able to win. And this one, it was very evident that Father Time had caught up with Fedor. But nonetheless, congratulations to both Ryan Bader and Johnny Eblen for both getting successful title defenses in Bellator. It was a very fun fight card, especially it getting broadcasted on CBS. I always love watching when UFC goes on ABC or ESPN, some of the national news networks. I love seeing the UFC grow. PFL's on ESPN now. So it's very awesome to see that happen where it's on such a big stage of a national broadcast where anybody can get it. CBS and ABC, when UFC does about one event a year, it seems like, on ABC. It's always fun to see those types of events. But congrats to Bader and Eblen again for their title defenses. Now let's go on to UFC Fight Night. Derek Lewis taking on Sergey Spivak in the main event. I'm only going to be talking about two fights, both heavyweight fights. The two fights where it was ranked versus ranked fighters. First off, Marcin Tybura taking on Blagoy Ivanov. This was not the most incredibly exciting fight from just like a casual fan standpoint, but it was a very technical fight between two very talented heavyweights. I mean, we're talking about a guy, Marcin Tybura, who is kind of getting his ropes and being the top 10 in a division. Blagoy Ivanov seems to be more past what his prime used to be. He was a former top 10 heavyweight. Now he's sitting at 15. He might drop out of the rankings after this loss. But Marcin Tybura was just a bit more active, quite a bit more accurate. Ivanov had a very hard time connecting with Tybura. Tybura also just fought a smarter fight, realized that it was close or could have been close going into that third round. So he got a takedown, controlled Ivanov for the entire round, and was able to ride that third round victory to a win, a unanimous decision win. Very good fight for him. I also like the Jairzinho Rozenstruik call out afterwards, getting his feet wet in the top 10 of this division. I mean, he's beat Alexander Romanov, he's beat Blagoy Ivanov, he's beaten top 15 guys. Now, I think it's time for him to get one of those top 10 guys. Depending on how far Derek Lewis drops, I wouldn't mind seeing Tybura and Derek Lewis going at it. Or the Rozenstruik call out, like I said. I like both of those fights for him. And speaking of Derek Lewis, now this one, I wish there was more to talk about in this fight, but Spivac legitimately, in the truest sense of the word, dominated Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis attempted 0 strikes. He attempted 0 takedowns. He attempted 0 submissions. He had 0 reversals. Spivac got him on the ground. Derek Lewis would get back up. Spivac would put him back on the ground. Derek Lewis would get up, put him back on the ground. And they just went back and forth like that for a few minutes until Sergey Spivac was able to land the arm triangle and put himself, more than likely, I think, you beat a guy like Derek Lewis, number 7 in the rankings as we speak right now. Obviously, that's going to change. But you beat a top 10 opponent. I think that's time for Sergey Spivac to be put in the top 10. He has quite a few big wins in his career. So I think it's time to finally get him over the hump, put him into that top 10, because he's incredibly talented and he's just overwhelming. He's an incredible grappler. They were talking about on the broadcast, that's what he does. He takes you down, sometimes lets you get back up just to take you back down again, because he understands how exhausting that is, especially when you're talking about Sergey Spivac, who's 240? You're trying to drag 240 pounds plus your own weight in the heavyweight division up and down. You're going to get exhausted. So very great game plan for Sergey Spivac, and very, very huge win against a former title challenger, 2-time title challenger, actually, for Sergey Spivac, and probably a top 10 ranking in his future. He did also call out the winner of John Jones and Cyril Gane. I definitely don't see that happening. I love the confidence. I mean, it's great to see that type of confidence in him, but also at the same time, like, that's a big jump up to beating the number 7 guy who's lost 4 of his last 5, lost his last 3 at least, including the Spivac fight. But yeah, you're not getting John Jones or Cyril Gahn. I see more of a Taito Ivasa Tom Aspinall rematch type fight for Sergey Spivak in the future. I don't know the availability of Tom Aspinall. I don't know what his injury is looking like, but I do like the Taito Ivasa rematch. I actually just rewatched the first fight between them when they fought in Australia a few years ago, when Izzy and Robert Whitaker had their first matchup. So I think that would be a fun fight to rewatch again, seeing Taito Ivasa and Sergey Spivak go at it. And now, lastly, before we get into some predictions, the Ultimate Fighter Season 31 coaches are announced, and it's awesome. I love it. I am here for it 1000%. I don't care what anybody says. Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler is unreal. This season is going to be so much fun to watch because while I don't fully like coaches overtaking the spotlight and making the show about them, I don't think either of these guys would do that. If anyone would, it would be Conor, but Michael Chandler is very much what I've seen from Michael Chandler. He's very much I'm going to let these guys be the focus. They are why we're here. I think it's absolutely fantastic. We've had a few of the last like 2 or 3 seasons. There wasn't very much animosity. There wasn't much back and forth with the coaches. I mean, you do have the rivalry in Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes, but there was a lot of mutual respect, and that's fine. Also, you can go back to before. I mean, Alexander Volkanovski, Brian Ortega was the same story. Before that, Robert Whitaker and Kelvin Gastelum. Before the Ultimate Fighter kind of took a back seat from everything. There was a lot of seasons in a row where there was a lot of mutual respect. Not saying that Chandler and McGregor don't have mutual respect for each other. I'm sure they do. But they're also going to talk a lot of smack to each other. And that's what I'm most excited to see. And not only that, as of recent, some of the non-title fights that the UFC has created as pay-per-view main events, we go back to Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal. Meh. Nate Diaz, originally it was Nate Diaz, Khamzat Chimaev, turned into Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, which I actually didn't mind. I think that's a pay-per-view worthy main event for a non-title because those are two legends going at it. But I didn't like the idea of Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev in a main event. I'm kind of going back even farther. You had like the Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz. Okay, that's all right. Leon Edwards, Nate Diaz, meh. This one, I mean, I have zero complaints. Conor McGregor, the biggest star the UFC has ever seen. Like, it's not even close. And Michael Chandler, who has, in all of his 5 fights in the UFC, has been incredibly entertaining. Win or lose, he has been absolutely incredibly entertaining. I'm so excited for this fight to go down later this year. I know Conor has to rejoin the US 88 testing pool. And it just came out, I believe, yesterday on Sunday that the fight will be held at welterweight. Kind of expected that. I don't think Conor can make it back down to lightweight, but I'm very, very excited for this fight. I can't wait for it. It's going to be so much fun to watch. All right, but now let's get into some fight predictions. UFC 284. Before I actually get into the fight predictions, I do want to address a couple things surrounding this event. First off, I agree with Islam Makhachev completely. The UFC completely and utterly dropped the ball on promoting this event. This is the number 1 versus number 2 pound for pound fighters in the world. We are talking about the first ever time 2 guys coming into a fight with 10 plus fight win streaks. And there's barely been any promoting around it. I mean, you gotta promote this thing. So yeah, I totally agree with that fact that it was not promoted well enough. I truly believe that. Second, I see a lot of people talking about how weak this card is, aside from the main event and co-main event. While I agree, I also do want to bring up the point that this was actually a really good card. When it first was announced, this was a great card because we had Robert Whitaker and Paulo Costa. That got called off. We had Kai Kara France versus Alex Perez. That got called off. So we're looking at this, and yeah, it doesn't look like the greatest pay per view card ever. But one, you don't need a great pay per view card surrounding Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski. You just don't. Plus, we had the canceled fights. So I would say this is more of a bad luck that led to a weaker card, more than just the UFC not creating a great enough card. So just wanted to get that off my chest. It's not that big of a deal, but something that's kind of been on my mind as of late, seeing like on Twitter and Instagram, like all the people complaining about what this fight card is, because it's really, on paper, it's not that great. But let's get into some fight predictions. Starting off the main card, a very exciting fight in the light heavyweight division. Jimmy Crute, the number 12th ranked light heavyweight, taking on Alonzo Menafield. Jimmy Crute, who is looking to get back on the winning side of things, as he has lost his last two. Granted, those losses came to top 5 contender in Anthony Smith and current champ Jamal Hill. So okay, yeah, you lost, but you lost to two of the best fighters in that division. These two are very well rounded, contrasting styles, though, if you look at it. Jimmy Crute, very good grappler, and without a doubt is going to try to get this fight on the ground. He is coming off of a 14-month layoff. That can be concerning. But he is also in front of his home crowd in Australia, so I think he'll have that little bit of extra motivation. That there might be some ring rust, but I think feeling the energy of the crowd and being back in Australia for the first time in 3-4 years is going to motivate him and put him back into this fight. But he's a very good grappler, like I said. He's going to try to get this fight on the ground. But that's not going to be easy. Alonzo Menafield has incredible takedown defense. He can also grapple himself, so he knows how to get out of these situations where he's on the ground with a good wrestler, because he has the wrestling background as well. He also possesses one-shot knockout power, and has the motivation to put himself in the rankings. This would be his 3rd straight win, so that is... And it would be over the 12th ranked light heavyweight. So that probably, you win that fight, that jumps you right into the rankings. And so that's going to be big, big motivation for Alonzo Menafield. I think this is going to be a very exciting fight, but I am going to go with Jimmy Crute in front of his hometown crowd. I'm going with decision. I think that both of these guys are tough as nails. And if I see anybody finishing the fight, I see Menafield finishing the fight. I think Jimmy Crute, if he wins, he's going to take it the distance. He's going to get the pressure. He's going to get him on the ground and hold him there. Maybe get some ground and pound, attempt a few submissions. But I just don't see him being able to string together a lot of things on Alonzo Menafield to be able to get a finish, per se. The next fight I want to talk about, Jack Della Maddalena taking on Randy Brown. And guys, I cannot express how excited I am for this fight. This may be the most excited I've ever been for a fight where neither guy was ranked, which is absolutely insane, thinking about what these guys have done as of late. That just goes to show how good the welterweight division really is. Jack Della Maddalena has been absolutely unstoppable since his Contender Series win in 2021, stringing together 3 straight first-round finishes in his 3 fights in the UFC. Randy Brown has also been incredibly exciting. With his much longer UFC career, he has won 7 out of his last 10, with the 3 losses being Vicente Luque, a top 10 welterweight, Nico Price, who's not in the rankings, but he's pretty dang close to being in those rankings. Very talented fighter, very unorthodox fighter, hard to kind of fight with. He's very hard to manage. And lastly, his first loss in those three losses was Bilal Muhammad, who's now a top 5 welterweight. So 3 very good fighters that he lost to. He has also won 4 straight fights, so he is riding very high as well with Jack Della Maddalena. Both guys are primarily strikers, can go to the ground if needed. I would say Randy Brown would have a little bit more of an advantage on the ground, but truthfully, I see both of these guys standing up for the most part. That being said, a very, very tough fight to call, but I'm going with Jack Della Maddalena. Not a 4th straight first round finish, but I think he does get a finish in the second round via TKO. Going to be an awesome fight, though. And now for the co-main event, our first of 2 title fights, this one for the interim featherweight title. This is going to be a very, very fun fight. Yair Rodriguez, one of the most dynamic strikers in the UFC. We all remember the legitimate last-second KO of the Korean Zombie a few years ago, where he just kind of threw the elbow up and knocked him out cold. At 4 minutes and 59 seconds of the 5th round, the latest knockout in UFC history. He has also beat the likes of Jeremy Stevens, the legend, former champion BJ Penn, Dan Hooker, went 5 rounds with former champ Max Holloway, where, yes, he lost that fight, but he was not completely dominated like we've seen other fights. Like Calvin Kattar was completely dominated by Max Holloway in that fight. So Yair Rodriguez held his own. 2 judges had it 48-47. 1 judge had it 49-46. So multiple judges had Yair Rodriguez winning multiple rounds against Max Holloway, who at that time was regarded as the greatest featherweight of all time. And now, oh God, now he's only the 2nd greatest featherweight of all time. Okay. So Yair, fantastic striker. I look to him to keep this fight on the feet as much as possible. Josh Emmett, a very well-rounded, a very technical, and incredibly tough fighter to beat. He has also produced a very, very good resume. He has, as of late, winning 5 in a row, beating the likes of Michael Johnson, Shane Burgos, Dan Ige, and had a 5-round war where he got the split decision victory over Calvin Kattar, who has been kind of a gatekeeper of this division and is an incredibly talented striker. It was a controversial win, but I mean, still to go 5 rounds and have a good fight against a guy like Calvin Kattar is very, very impressive. Both of these guys are extremely tough. They're both going to be extremely tough to beat. I do see this fight going the distance. I just don't think that either one's going to be able to stop the other. We're talking about guys who went 5 rounds with Max Holloway and 5 rounds with Calvin Kattar. Neither one is an easy job to do. And one of them came out on top against a Calvin Kattar. I think Yair's style is just going to be a bit too awkward for Emmett to get a great offense going for that. For that, I'm going to go Yair Rodriguez by decision. And that leads us to our main event of the evening. Islam Makhachev taking on Alexander Volkanovski. This is one of the greatest, if not the greatest matchup the UFC could produce at this moment. The top 2 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. The dominant featherweight champ puts his 22-fight win streak, 12 of those being in the UFC, moves up to lightweight to try and become a champ, taking on the just as dominant, except newly crowned lightweight champ, Khabib's prodigy, who is also bringing an 11-fight win streak into this fight, in Islam Makhachev. This is going to be absolutely incredible, an incredible grappler. And Islam, who has actually come out and said he will actually try to stand up with Alexander Volkanovski, which to me sounds like he doesn't respect the power of Alexander Volkanovski. I don't see that plan lasting very long, if I'm being honest with you. Volk is. We got to remember that this guy was a rugby player that once weighed like 200 something pounds. He has power. He has a lot of power. And I think that Islam is going to realize that very early. I think he's going to adjust and try to get this fight to the ground. Volk is going to have to do everything in his power to keep this fight on the feet. We saw what Charles Oliveira, who is one of the greatest jiu-jitsu artists in UFC history, get absolutely manhandled on the ground by Islam Makhachev. I think Volk is fantastic, but he just cannot compete with Islam on the ground. Another fight that is fairly tough to call, but I think if Islam avoids the game plan of trying to strike with Volk early and he gets this fight on the ground, I think Islam is going to win this fight. I'm going with Islam by decision to retain his lightweight crown as the lightweight champion. And probably after winning this fight, he will probably become the number one pound for pound fighter in the world. And it's hard to argue that when he's number 2 right now and he would be beating the number 1 pound for pound fighter. But very, very excited for that fight. I mean, who isn't? It's going to be an absolutely incredible fight. Now, for next week, I'm actually going on vacation on Sunday, so I will not be able to do Monday Night Fight Talk for next week. So we will be taking a week off, but then the week after we will be back to our normally scheduled programming. I'm very excited for what's to come for the UFC. I mean, go look at the March schedule alone. It is absolute bonkers. We're talking about 4 absolutely incredible main events. We got John Jones, the return of John Jones taking on Cyril Gane, Piotr Yan taking on Merab Dvalishvili, Usman versus Edwards 3. We got Cheeto Vera versus Corey Sandhagen. That's not even mentioned. Those are just the main events. We're not even talking about Gaethje versus Fiziev, Shevchenko versus Grasso, possibly Raquel Pennington versus Irene Aldana. Anthony Smith said he has a fight scheduled for March 25th as well. We don't know the opponent yet, but man, March is looking to be very, very exciting. I'm very excited to do this show. But again, next week I will be off. That being said, you can find me on Instagram at Monday Night Fight Talk. You can find me on Twitter at MN Fight Talk. For any of your MMA needs, I'm always there. I'm usually posting more on Twitter. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm very much a Twitter person more than an Instagram person. But I do want to change that. I do want to get more into the social media, maybe post some clips on my Instagram and Twitter feed. So let me know what you guys think about that. Maybe join TikTok, post some clips on there as well. So let me know what you guys think on that. As always, if you want to ask me a question, feel free to DM me on Twitter or Instagram, comment on this video. Any questions you have, if it's just a short little one answer thing I can give you, I'll just reply to you. If it's a little bit of a longer answer, I can do it on the show directly and maybe give you a shout out if you so choose to want that. But thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you all in 2 weeks, same time, same place on YouTube, Mondays 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for Monday Night Fight Talk.